Welcome to Dove and Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. I'm here with my very special friend, Neil Gordon. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
Now, you have several books out, and I'm going through your website. I mean, it's amazing. So let's start with your newest, it looks like, The Bomb Squad.
Yes, that's my newest book that was just released about 2 weeks ago.
Wow. Well, happy release.
Thank you.
Briefly, what is this one about?
Well, it's historical fiction. It takes place in the New York metropolitan area in 1916, right before America is about to enter World War I. World War I is already raging in Europe. America is still neutral, but that doesn't mean there's nothing going on here. What's happening is that we have a lot of Germans living in the New York metropolitan area because they were basically stranded here because a lot of Germans were going back and forth by ship, and then the ships got quarantined in harbor because it was too dangerous to cross. So mostly on the New Jersey side, there was a lot of Germans here and a lot of German nationals. And the story takes place between two patriots. Both German-American. One is Dr. Harold Schwartz. He is a doctor and the administrator of Ellis Island Immigrant Hospital, and also a German spy. And along with his father, who was a lifelong friend of the Kaiser Wilhelm, they're hell-bent on distracting America from entering the war. So they're blowing things up in the New York area. And there's lots of true historical events that I tie in at that time. And meanwhile, we have another German-American, but he's an American. He's a New York City police detective, and he is recruited by the British Secret Intelligence Service, also known as the SIS, to assemble what they call the Bomb Squad, which is 4 other men, including himself, German-speaking, to stop these disruptions, this violence that these German spies are creating. So that's the story. It's Clash of the Patriots. 2 men who both think they're on the right side of history. 2 men who think they're doing the right thing, and it's a story of love and betrayal, of all sorts of espionage and detectives trying to figure out what's going on. It stretches from the New York area to Germany and back again. And it's an adventure story. It's a crime story. It's a historical fiction story. And
I love the ones that tie in actual historical events, because then you're left thinking, is this history or is this fiction?
Yeah, well, that's why I like the genre of historical fiction, because as you're reading a book and spending a lot of time reading a book, you're also learning something about history at the same time. So I make sure that whatever event that I'm talking about in my book actually happened at that time, and try to make it as accurate as I can. Yet I'm adding fictional characters to that event, but that's how how historical fiction is created.
Right. Now, typically on one book, how much time do you spend on research?
Well, it's research the whole time I'm writing, because I don't do all the research and then start writing. I write what I call organically, which I don't have an outline. I'll have an idea of the story of when it takes place or where it needs to end up, and then I begin. So as I'm writing it, ideas come to me, and I might want to find an event that was important that occurred at that time in that place, and I'll tie it in.
Cool.
So research takes months, and the writing takes months. So it goes concurrently together as I move along in the process.
See, I asked because you have the authors that plan every detail.
Right.
Like James Patterson, I believe he has a room with sticky notes. Is how much detail he writes down before he writes anything. And
right. He'll write a 100-page outline for his books before he even begins.
Yeah. See, it's crazy, but that's his process. Then you have organic writers like ourselves that just have an idea and start writing, then maybe research a little bit and then go from there. So,
right. Well, Stephen King writes organically. He has no idea. He has an idea of a story, of a germ of a story, and of characters, but he has no idea where the story will end up.
Right.
I like that process. The outline process, to me, I tried it. It doesn't fit with my personality and my writing style, and I like, because I'm surprised at my story as I write it, where it brings me, and if I'm surprised, the reader will be surprised. The worst thing for a reader to experience is being bored with a story and putting it down.
Right.
That's terrible. So I want someone to be excited and page turning, and can't wait to get to the finish.
Exactly. I do this with my own writing. I'm writing a character, and then halfway through, I kill the character off. I wasn't meaning to kill him off.
Right.
The story just went that way.
Exactly. And then people say, "Why did you kill that character off?" And it just had to. I'm sorry.
Exactly. You talk to your fans and they go, "Why did this happen at this point? Why couldn't something else happen?" Well, sorry, it just...
Yeah. People say that. In my first book, A Cobbler's Tale, one of my main characters is killed, and a woman came up to me. She goes, "I love your book, but I'm complaining about one thing." I'm going, "What? What do you want?" "I can't believe you killed so and so off." I'm like, "Okay, I'm sorry," but that's the way the story was. But
so, what is the Cobbler's Tale about?
Well, the Cobbler's Tale actually takes place around the same time as the Bomb Squad takes place, but it's a Jewish immigration story, and it's basically about my great-grandparents. Partially, I gave them much more. I exaggerated their life force much more dramatically, and I made my great-grandfather much more heroic than he really was. But it starts off in Poland, which at that time it wasn't called Poland. It was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire in the region called Galicia, and they lived in a shtetl, which was a little Jewish village. And at that time, people were immigrating to America, and in particular to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So my great-grandfather decided he was going to immigrate, and he's a cobbler, and he was going to go first, get his business established, find a place to live, and then come back a year later and get his family,
right.
Which included his pregnant wife and 3 children, and one of the 3 children was my grandfather, and he was going to go back and get them. But as things turned out, he didn't go back in a year, and a couple of years later, World War I broke out, and he couldn't go back, and from there, that's how the story begins. I'm not going to say anything more because I'll just be giving spoilers away.
Right. We don't want spoilers, but at the same time, people have to understand during the 1900s, right before World War I and World War II, a lot of the immigrants would come over, start their business or find work, and then either send for their family or go back to retrieve their family. And
yeah, it was very common.
Yeah,
right.
There was nothing wrong with that. That was what they were doing, because you don't.
Yeah, but what Pincus did though, he waited too long. He was a little bit too greedy. He stayed here too long. He was too interested in his business. He was supposed to go back in a year. He waited a couple of years, and then it was too late. And they lived in the bloodiest area, one of the bloodiest areas of the war, on the European continent. You had the fighting in France, which was extremely bloody, but also the fighting in the Polish area also was very bloody between the Austrians and the Germans versus the Russians, and that was very, very bloody area. So they lived in a war zone for the entire war.
You don't think about all the history that our ancestors went through. And
yeah, it was hard.
Yes, and I'm glad that we have historical fiction writers, because now you're teaching a little bit of the history that's not taught in schools, but at the same time, you're doing it in a way that's entertaining and enlightening to a natural reader.
Exactly. So that was A Cobbler's Tale. The next book was Moonflower, which also was historical fiction, but that took place in the 1670s. Also in New York, but it was before it was called New York. It was called New Amsterdam, and it was controlled by the Dutch. And this book takes place right when the English are about to take over New York area from the Dutch. And this is a story about a teenage boy, 17, 18-year-old boy, who ends up living with Native Americans. And the way the story begins, he's going to go on this quest to connect with the Great Spirit. And in order to connect with the Great Spirit, the shaman is going to give him this concoction that's made from the seeds of the moonflower, which is a flower that blooms only at night. And it's called, and we have that plant growing around here today too. It's called datura. It's hallucinogenic, very powerful. But under the auspices and guidance of a shaman, when you drink the moonflower concoction, you lose your memory. So the book begins when the shaman is telling Lucas, my protagonist, he hands him parchment and a quill and says, I want you to write everything down about your life that you can remember, from your earliest memory up until your 17th birthday, wherever you are right now, and write everything down, because this will be the document that you have that will tell you who you are. Because when you come out of this, you won't remember a thing. So that's how the book begins. He writes this down, and of course, when he comes out of it, he has no memory. He has all these words that are written, but there's no emotional connection to those words.
Right.
They're just words on a page. It could be anyone's life. So, so it's that struggle that he has to rebirth, refine himself. And then, of course, he has all these conflicts and evil characters and
of course.
Evil Englishmen who he has to come across during that tale. So that's the Moonflower story.
And then you have the Righteous One.
Yes, and that's book 2 to a Cobbler's Tale, which takes place in 1960, where my grandfather's again, I give my grandfather all sorts of mystical powers in this. This is not historical fiction. It's metaphysical fiction, because this takes place that the main character has these powers. He has this connection to God, and he has these powers that when someone is about to pass, and Moshe, who's the main character, is there when whoever is passing away, he can actually make that connection so that person actually can see God right before they pass. He also has the power of making people feel calm and feel good when they're around him. But it was a power that he hasn't used since he was a child, and talked about in the first book of Cobbler's Tale. But there's danger in New York, in the Bronx, and this evil character is involved, and Moshe is called upon to resurrect these powers that he once had, and they have to try to destroy this evil. And the only way they can do this is in the dream world. So that's the metaphysical part about the story. So I talk about lucid dreaming and Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, that very evil character and a very good character. So that was my journey into metaphysical fiction. And then I mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It looks like it came out really well.
Yeah, it was. I really had fun writing that story. So yeah, I actually I try to put in all my books, except for the Bomb Squad. That's pretty straight. I don't have any metaphysical content in there at all. But all the other stories, The Cobbler's Tale, Moonflower, and my newest book that's coming out in a couple of weeks, Hope City, has all those elements of the mysticism into the stories.
Well, since we do have a new release coming out, what is your new release about?
Yeah, right now I'm getting down with having a proofread, and then it's got to be formatted and uploaded onto Amazon. So it's a couple of weeks away before it's going to be ready. I'm anticipating around a June 1st release. Mm-hmm. This book is called Hope City. It takes place in 1898. This is the first book that's not taking place in the New York metropolitan area. This takes place in Alaska during the summer of 1898 during the gold rush. And it's a story of, again, two 17-year-old boys who just graduated from high school in San Francisco, and talked their parents into allowing them to go up on the steamship, the Bertha, to this little town in Alaska where this gold rush is going on, and they want to go seek their fortunes. And so they're allowed to go, and they travel up to this town in Alaska, and it's sort of this trip down the rabbit hole for them. Well, in particular for my main character. And, all these bizarre things happen to him during this couple of months while he's up in Alaska during the gold rush and meeting all sorts of interesting characters up there. So again, I'm not going to give away too much, but that's called Hope City, and that'll be out probably around June 1st.
Awesome. Now, when did you decide you wanted to just start writing?
Well, I started writing seriously when I first started Cobbler's Tale, which is a couple of years ago now. I've always wanted to write fiction. I've written several business books, coaching books, and business books in my profession, nonfiction, obviously. But I always loved the idea of being a writer, of being an author, of being a novelist. And I just got kick-started a couple of years ago, like 2017, to get going, and that's all it took. I started the engine, and it's still roaring away. So I love the process. I love writing. I love having a creative outlet where I could always be producing something and being productive. So even during this 4 weeks I've been locked up, it's been wonderful for me as a writer to have all this extra free time to sit and write. So it's been very productive for me to do that. I love it, and I also love being a writer. It's really a very rewarding thing to do when people come to you after they read your book and tell you how much they loved it. When you compare artists, different types of artists, one to another. If you're a painter, or if you go into a museum, a patron of the arts may just spend a couple of hours in a museum and then come home. Or if you love music and like to go to concerts, if you go to a concert, it might be a couple hours at a concert. You like it and you go home. But when you have to read a book, when you sit down and reading a book, you're investing weeks and sometimes months in reading that book. So, you're asking a lot of a reader who's going to take your work and delve into it and then get back to you and let you know how they feel about it. So it's a big investment for the audience to pick up one of your books and read them. So I really like that part of it. And then when I hear positive things coming back, that's extremely rewarding.
Exactly. We love our readers so much as authors. We love our reviews. That's how we grow as authors, is our reviews.
Yeah. Exactly.
If you come up to an author and start talking about our books, you just made our year.
Yeah, exactly. That's my favorite topic, if someone wants to talk to me about my book.
Exactly. And then we're listening to everything you're saying. That way we can incorporate it somewhere, somehow, in another book.
Yeah, very true. What I like to do for your audience, and you sort of led me into this, because, as you said, reviews are very important, and it's always the hardest thing to get for a writer, especially get your reviews on Amazon. I once heard or figured that for every 100 books that you sell, you can get one review. So that's not a very good batting average in terms of getting reviews. But because it's not that people don't like your book, it's just people don't leave reviews. Right. So what I would like to do for your audience as a gift to you and to your audience is offer a free download of my book, The Bomb Squad, in exchange for a review. So if they want to email me, I will then return a PDF copy of my book. Hopefully they'll read it, and hopefully they'll give me a review, and hopefully they'll give me 5 stars. And it works for me and it works for them. So they get a free copy of my book. Hopefully I can get a nice review. So if they email me at neilperrygordon@gmail.com, I'll send them a PDF copy of the book, The Bomb Squad.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that link for your email is also in the YouTube video and wherever else I post it, so they can actually get your email right on the post.
Perfect.
So this works great. This is why I love organic radio, because we can do little things like this. It's not scripted.
Yeah, it's fun.
And we have so much fun doing different things. Now, I know you have a book coming out. With all this free time that you have to write, are you working on something?
Yes, I have just finished the first draft of a new manuscript. That the book, I won't get to my editor probably till June. So in terms of publishing, probably the earliest this will be published will be in August, I'm guessing. But it's called White Slave. It's a darker story than I've ever written before. I'm sort of challenging myself to going to places where I never thought I would go. But when I sort of mentioned the story idea in two of my books. It's a little seed that's planted, and when I talk about it a bit, but it talks about it's about sex slaves in the 1930, and so I was like, God, can I write this type of book? And I was like, I'm going to try to do it, and I made it through. I got down the first draft, and I'm going to go back now and make sure it's as dark and and as emotional as I could possibly make it. But as a writer or as any artist, you always want to try to evolve and challenge yourself to new things that you're not comfortable with doing.
Right.
Because that's the whole idea is, to go out of your comfort zone. So I tried doing that with this book. It's always, I always like hold my breath to like get it to my editor, and then she'll come back and say, yeah, this is great. Which she said every time so far. So, but this is really something, I've never done before. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, it sounds interesting. Okay, I have no idea what this looks like. You haven't even given it to your editor, but it sounds interesting. But you can also kind of, with the sex slaves, go into relating to now, if the reader's mind goes there, to the trafficking right now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this whole thing with this, with trafficking, there was some articles that were written about this, Jeffrey, who that guy in New York, Jeffrey Stein, was it, who killed himself in prison, who was sex trafficking young women in Manhattan, getting young girls. So there was an article written about him tying into this time of what I was writing about, because the book takes place in Poland in 1930 and in Buenos Aires. It mostly takes place in Buenos Aires. I'll give you a little synopsis of the story. There was this Jewish mafiosa type group called Z Migdal, and what they would do, they would go to Poland and they would go to these Jewish shtetls where everyone's very poor, and they would put advertisements up in the synagogue advertising rich Argentinian men who want to marry young Jewish women and bring them back to Buenos Aires. But it was a deceitful thing. They were actually bringing them back as sex slaves and putting them in brothels as sex slaves in Buenos Aires. And it was rampant all throughout Buenos Aires and other surrounding cities during the late 20s and mid-30s. So this really happened. And this was trafficking going on back then. So my story is, it's a love story that begins in Poland. The Jewish girl wants to marry a non-Jewish boy. Father's like, no way is this happening. He panics, basically sells his daughter to this rich Argentinian man who's one of these recruiters for the Zvi Migdal, takes her back to Buenos Aires and puts her in a brothel as a sex slave. And of course, my hero, her fiance who loves her, has to go and rescue her. So that's a little synopsis of the story. It creates
awesome.
A lot of conflict.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the whole thing is conflict, but at the same time, they make great stories. But you have to
need conflict for a story.
Yeah, it's the only way you get a story is if there's conflict.
Exactly.
But we're almost out of time. So where can our readers find you?
Well, my website is the best, neilperrygordon.com. You can go right to my website. And if you want to just go right to my books, you can go to Amazon and look up my name, Neil Perry Gordon. under books, and I have all my books are available in ebook and in paperback. My first two are also available in audiobook, and the Bomb Squad and Righteous One are being recorded right now for audio. So in another couple of weeks or so, I'll have all 4 books available in ebook, paperback, and audio.
Awesome. Well, it was great having you on the show. And when
thank you.
Your next book comes out, I'll love to have you on to talk about that one a little bit more.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And for all of our readers, don't forget to email Neil and get a free copy of the Bomb Squad, and all it takes is a review. So, happy reading, everyone.